Sometimes all a father wants is a place his child can call home. For Marcus, a single dad at 44, that dream finally came true when he bought a small house he could barely afford. But just days after moving in with his young daughter, he started hearing strange, scratching sounds in the walls. He figured it was just mice or rats, nothing unusual for an old house. The sounds kept getting louder and stranger. One day, he noticed a crack in the concrete driveway and decided to investigate. He started drilling into the crack, and what appeared beneath stunned him. A hidden entrance with a ladder leading down into darkness. There was a secret basement no one knew existed, right under his driveway. What was hidden down there and why? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Webb had spent the better part of 2 decades learning that life rarely handed you what you wanted on a silver platter. At 44, his hands were calloused from years of turning wrenches at Rodriguez Auto Repair. His back ached from bending over engine blocks, and his bank account reflected the reality of raising a child alone on a mechanic's wages. But on a crisp Saturday morning in late September, as he stood in front of the small bungalow at 847 Maple Street, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. The house wasn't much to look at. Built sometime in the early 1950s, it wore its age openly. The beige siding had faded to an uncertain color, somewhere between cream and gray. The front porch sagged slightly on the left side, and the concrete driveway bore a jagged crack that ran from the street almost to the garage door. The lawn needed attention, and the flower beds were choked with weeds. But it was his. After years of cramped apartments with paper-thin walls and landlords who treated maintenance requests like personal insults, Marcus owned this place. "Daddy, is that really our house?" 8-year-old Keisha stood beside him, her hand tucked into his, her brown eyes wide with wonder. "It really is, baby girl." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "What do you think?" Keisha tilted her head, considering the question with the seriousness she brought to everything. She'd inherited that from her mother, that careful way of examining the world before committing to an opinion. It was one of the few things Janelle had left them with before. She'd decided that motherhood wasn't the adventure she'd signed up for and moved to Phoenix, with a man she'd met online. "I think it's perfect," Keisha finally announced. "Can I pick which room is mine?" Marcus laughed, the sound surprising him with its genuine warmth. "Already got one picked out for you. Come on, let's go see." The key turned smoothly in the lock. The real estate agent had left it under the mat as promised. The door swung open with a creak that suggested the hinges could use some oil, and they stepped into what would become their new life. The interior smelled of dust and old wood, with an underlying mustiness that spoke of months sitting empty. The previous owner, Marcus had learned during closing, had been an elderly man named Howard Holbrook, who'd lived here for decades before passing away in a nursing home 3 years ago. The estate had finally been settled. The property sold at a price Marcus could just barely manage, with the small inheritance from his own father and a mortgage that would stretch his budget thin for years too. "Come." The living room opened directly from the front door, a modest space with hardwood floors that needed refinishing, and walls that bore the faded rectangles where pictures had once hung. To the right, a short hallway led to 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. To the left, the kitchen waited, outdated but functional. Marcus had been through it all during the inspection, but seeing it now truly his made it feel different somehow. "This way." "Keisha." He guided her down the hallway to the smaller of the 2 bedrooms, the one that faced the backyard. "I thought you might like this one. It gets the morning sun, and you can see the old oak tree out back." Keisha released his hand and walked into the empty room, her footsteps echoing. She went straight to the window and pressed her hands against the glass. "There's a tire swing." "There is. We'll have to check if it's still safe, but if it is, it's all yours." She turned to face him, and the smile on her face made every sacrifice, every extra shift, every skipped lunch to save money absolutely worth it. "Can we paint it, my room?" "Whatever color you want, baby girl. This is your space." The moving truck arrived an hour later, though calling it a moving truck was generous. It was actually Terence's pickup truck, loaded with the modest collection of furniture and boxes that represented their worldly possessions. Terence Hayes worked with Marcus at the garage and had volunteered to help with the move, refusing to take no for an answer. "Man, this place has good bones," Terence said, as they carried Keisha's bed frame through the front door. He was a tall man, built solid from years of physical work, with graying hair and a ready smile. "Needs some work, but nothing you can't handle. That's the plan. Fix it up slowly. Make it home." Marcus maneuvered his end of the bed frame around the corner. "Can't thank you enough for this, T. What are friends for? Besides, you've covered for me at the shop enough times. This is me returning the favor." They worked steadily through the morning and into early afternoon, unloading boxes and furniture, arranging and rearranging, until Keisha was satisfied with the layout of her room. Marcus's own bedroom was simpler, just his bed, a dresser, and a small nightstand. He'd sold or donated most of his furniture before the move, keeping only what was necessary. As Terence was leaving, he paused at his truck. "You know, there's a lady next door been watching from her window all morning. Probably should go introduce yourself, be neighborly and all." Marcus glanced at the house to the right, a well-maintained ranch with flower boxes in the windows. "Yeah, I'll do that." "Thanks again, T." After Terence drove away, Marcus found himself standing in his living room, surrounded by boxes but feeling something close to contentment. Keisha was in her room, arranging her books on the small shelf they'd placed under the window. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, making dust motes dance in the golden light. He was home. That evening, after a dinner of pizza eaten sitting on the floor because he hadn't unpacked the kitchen table yet, Marcus took Terence's advice and walked next door. An older woman answered his knock, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her face kind but cautious. "Mrs. Alvarez?" Marcus had gotten her name from the real estate agent. "I'm Marcus Webb, just moved in next door with my daughter." Her face transformed with a warm smile. "Oh, welcome. Please call me Rosa. I've been hoping someone would move in. The house has been empty too long. I appreciate that. Just wanted to introduce myself, let you know if you need anything. Come in, come in. I have fresh coffee, and I won't take no for an answer." She stepped back, gesturing him inside. Marcus found himself seated in a cozy kitchen, accepting a cup of coffee and a generous slice of tres leches cake, while Rosa Alvarez told him about the neighborhood. She'd lived here since 1965, she explained, and had watched the street change over the decades. Families came and went, children grew up and moved away, but the bones of the community remained solid. Mr. Holbrook, the man who owned your house, he was a good neighbor. Quiet man, kept to himself mostly, but always ready to help if you needed it. She paused, her expression growing distant. Lived there over 60 years, can you imagine? Since the house was built? That's a long time, Marcus agreed. Must have seen a lot of changes. Oh yes, this was a different world back then. She seemed about to say more, then changed direction. But you'll be happy there. It's a good house, solid, built to last. When Marcus returned home, Keisha was already in bed, exhausted from the excitement of the day. He tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Sweet dreams in your new room, baby girl." In his own room, Marcus lay awake for a while, listening to the sounds of the house settling around him. Every house had its own voice, he knew. Creaks and groans, the whisper of wind finding gaps in old windows, the tick of cooling pipes. He catalogued these sounds, learning the language of his new home. He was almost asleep when he heard it, a faint scratching sound, like something moving inside the walls. He opened his eyes, listening. There it was again, distant but distinct. Mice probably, or rats. Old houses always had them. He'd have to deal with that soon, get some traps, maybe call an exterminator. The scratching stopped. Marcus closed his eyes and drifted off, telling himself it was nothing to worry about. Just one more thing on the long list of repairs and improvements he'd tackle once they were settled in. Just mice in an old house. Nothing more than that. The scratching started in earnest 3 nights later. Marcus woke at 2 in the morning to the sound of something moving through the walls. Not the random skittering of a mouse, but something deliberate and persistent. He lay in the darkness, his mind foggy with interrupted sleep, trying to pinpoint the location. The sound seemed to move, traveling from somewhere near the living room toward the back of the house. He got up, careful not to wake Keisha, and walked through the house with a flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the still unpacked boxes stacked along the walls. He pressed his ear against the drywall in different locations, following the sound. When he reached the kitchen, it stopped. Marcus stood there in his boxer shorts and t-shirt, feeling foolish. It was just an animal. Old houses attracted them, warmth, shelter, sometimes food if they could find it. He'd call someone in the morning, but the next night it happened again. And the night after that. By the end of the first week, Marcus was exhausted. The sounds occurred like clockwork, 2 in the morning, and again around 7 in the evening, just after he and Keisha finished dinner. The pattern was too regular to be random, and that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Keisha noticed, of course. "Children always did. Daddy, what's that sound?" she asked one evening as they sat in the living room. She was working on homework at the coffee table while Marcus sorted through bills on the couch. The scratching had started right on schedule, a rhythmic sound that seemed to come from behind the bookshelf he'd placed against the far wall. "Just some mice in the walls, baby girl. Nothing to worry about. I'm going to take care of it. It doesn't sound like a mouse." Keisha's pencil hovered over her math worksheet. "It sounds bigger." Marcus set down the electric bill he'd been staring at without really seeing. "What do you mean, bigger?" She tilted her head, listening with that intense focus she brought to everything. "Mice sound like this." She made a light scratching sound with her fingernails against the table. "That sounds heavier. Like something pushing." She wasn't wrong. Marcus had been thinking the same thing, but hadn't wanted to admit it. "Could be a raccoon. They get into attics sometimes. We have an attic. A small one. I'll check it tomorrow." But when he climbed up into the cramped attic space the next afternoon, flashlight in hand, he found nothing. The insulation was intact, undisturbed by any animal traffic. No droppings, no nests, no signs of entry. He checked every corner, every potential gap where something might squeeze through. Nothing. The basement was next, or what passed for a basement. Really just a crawl space, accessed through a small door in the hallway closet. Marcus wiggled through, his shoulders scraping against the concrete foundation, his flashlight beam sweeping across the dirt floor beneath the house. Again, nothing. No holes, no tunnels, no evidence of any creature making a home under there. He emerged frustrated and confused. The sounds were real. He wasn't imagining them, and neither was Keisha. But there was no logical explanation for where they were coming from. "I think you need a professional," Terence said when Marcus mentioned it at work. "My cousin had rats in his walls once. Took a specialist to find where they were getting in, so Marcus called an exterminator. The man who showed up 2 days later was in his 60s, with weathered skin and the patient demeanor of someone who'd seen everything. His truck bore the logo, Novak Pest Control, 40 years experience. "Mr. Webb? I'm Pete Novak." They shook hands on the front porch. "Understand you've got some unwanted guests." "That's what I'm hoping you can tell me." Marcus led him inside. Scratching sounds, mostly at night, but sometimes in the evening too. "I've checked the attic and crawl space. Can't find any entry points or evidence of animals." Novak nodded slowly, already scanning the walls with a practiced eye. "Let's take a look." For the next hour, Marcus watched the exterminator work. Novak was thorough, checking every room, examining the exterior foundation, inspecting the roofline, probing gaps around pipes and utility lines. He used an inspection camera to peer into wall cavities through electrical outlet holes. He set up motion-activated cameras in the attic and crawl space. Finally, they stood in the living room, while Novak made notes on his clipboard. "Mr. Webb, I've been doing this for 40 years. I've dealt with everything from termites to bats to a family of opossums living in someone's chimney." He looked up from his notes, his expression puzzled. "I can't find any evidence of animal activity in your house, but the sounds. Oh, I believe you're hearing something. I'm just saying it's not wildlife. No droppings, no fur, no gnaw marks, no nests, nothing, and I checked everywhere an animal could possibly get in. He tapped his pen against the clipboard. The sounds you're describing, they're coming from inside the walls. Yes, moving through them like something's traveling along. Marcus stopped. Wait, if it's not animals, what is it? Novak shrugged. Could be pipes. Thermal expansion and contraction can cause strange noises. Could be the house settling. Could be, he hesitated. Could be something in the wall structure itself. Maybe previous owners stored something in there during construction, and it's shifting at the same times every day. I admit that's unusual. Novak pulled out his phone and showed Marcus photos from the inspection cameras. But look, nothing. Whatever's making the noise, it's not alive. After Novak left, refusing payment since he hadn't actually eliminated any pests, Marcus stood in his living room feeling more unsettled than before. If it wasn't animals, what was it? That evening, the scratching started right at 7 o'clock. Marcus was ready this time. He'd borrowed a stethoscope from Terence's wife, who was a nurse, and he pressed it against various sections of wall, trying to pinpoint the exact location. The sound was loudest against the wall between the living room and kitchen. He could hear it clearly through the stethoscope, not just scratching, but something else too. A rhythmic quality, almost like tapping. 3 long scratches, pause, 2 short ones, pause, 3 long again. Marcus pulled the stethoscope away from his ears, his heart beating faster. That wasn't random. That was a pattern. Almost like, no, he was being ridiculous. Houses made noises. There was a logical explanation, but then Keisha appeared in the doorway, her homework in hand. Daddy, why does the sound come from there? She pointed at the wall. There's no room behind there. Marcus frowned. What do you mean? Come here. She led him to the kitchen, counting her steps. See? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps from the door to the window. Then she took him back to the living room. Now count from this wall to the kitchen door. Marcus counted. 9 steps, but the 2 rooms shared a wall, so the total should have been... That's weird, he said slowly. There's about 4 feet that doesn't make sense. Where does it go? That was the question, wasn't it? Marcus examined the wall more carefully. It looked solid, standard drywall painted white. But when he knocked on it, the sound was different from the other walls. Hollow, not just hollow the way walls normally were, but deeper somehow. He went outside, walked around the house measuring with his eyes. The dimensions didn't quite add up. There was space unaccounted for. Back inside, he studied the crack in the driveway through the front window. It ran almost perfectly parallel to the front wall of the house. He'd assumed it was just normal concrete settling, but now he wondered. Late that night, after Keisha was asleep, Marcus went outside with a flashlight. He knelt beside the crack, examining it more closely. It wasn't like a typical crack from settling or frost heave. The edges were too clean, too straight. He ran his fingers along it, feeling where the concrete on one side was slightly higher than the other, as if something glinted in the flashlight beam. Marcus leaned closer. There, in the crack, something metallic reflected the light. He pulled a screwdriver from his back pocket and carefully worked it into the gap, prying gently. A small piece of concrete broke away, and with it came something else. Marcus picked it up, brushing away dirt and dust. It was a key. Old rusted with the number 7 stamped into the head. Marcus stood up slowly, the key heavy in his palm. He looked at the crack in the driveway, then at the house, then back at the key. This wasn't about mice in the walls. This was something else entirely. Someone had hidden this key here, deliberately, probably decades ago. And the scratching sounds, the missing space in the wall measurements, the strange patterns. His house was hiding something. The question was what, and whether he really wanted to find out. Marcus slept poorly that night, the key sitting on his nightstand like an accusation. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind raced with questions. Why would someone hide a key in a driveway crack? What did the number 7 mean? And what was behind that wall in his living room? By morning, exhaustion made his eyes burn, but he dragged himself out of bed anyway. He had to get Keisha to school and himself to work. Normal life didn't stop just because your house was keeping secrets. You looked tired. Daddy, Keisha observed over breakfast. Her spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Milk dripping back into her cereal bowl. Didn't sleep great, baby girl. But I'm okay. He forced a smile. How about you? Sleep all right? Yeah, the scratching didn't happen last night. Marcus realized she was right. For the first time in over a week, the house had been silent. Why? Because he'd found the key. That seemed impossible. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the two things were connected. At Rodriguez Auto Repair, Marcus tried to focus on the brake job in front of him, but his mind kept wandering. Finally, during his lunch break, he pulled out his phone and started searching. 47 Maple Street property history brought up some basic information. The house was built in 1952, had changed hands only twice, the most recent sale being his own. The previous owner, Howard Holbrook, purchased 1952, died 2018 at age 93. Marcus did the math. Holbrook had been in his late 20s when he bought the place, lived there his entire adult life. 66 years in one house. That was remarkable in itself. Earth to Marcus. Terrence's voice broke through his concentration. You've been staring at that phone for 10 minutes, man. Everything okay? Marcus looked up, then around the garage. They were alone. The other mechanics were out picking up parts. Can I ask you something weird? Weird is my specialty. Shoot. If you found out your house was hiding something, would you want to know what it was? Terrence leaned against the workbench, wiping grease from his hands. What kind of something we talking about? Like buried treasure something or dead bodies something? I don't know. That's the problem. Marcus found himself explaining everything. The scratching sounds, the missing space in the walls, the key. Terrence listened without interrupting, his expression growing more interested. Man, you've got to investigate. That's like the law of finding mysterious keys. You have to see what they open. He grinned. Want me to come over after work? Moral support? I appreciate it, but I should probably handle this myself. Don't know what I'm dealing with yet. Well, if you need help moving bodies, you know where to find me. Terrence's grin widened at Marcus's expression. I'm kidding. Mostly. After work, Marcus drove to the county clerk's office instead of going straight home. It was a detour he couldn't afford time-wise, but he needed information. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain, helped him request the original building permits for his house. These old records can be tricky, she explained, typing into her computer. We had a flood back in the 70s, lost some documents. But let's see what we have. She printed several pages, the original permit application, inspection records, and a basic floor plan. Marcus studied them at a table in the corner of the office. Standard single-family home, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, no basement. The floor plan matched what he knew of his house, except he pulled out his phone and opened the calculator app, checking measurements. The dimensions on the permit didn't quite match reality. The living room wall was marked as exterior, but if that were true, there wouldn't be room for the kitchen behind it. Excuse me, he called to the clerk. Is it possible these plans are incomplete? She came over, peering through her glasses at the documents. It's possible. Like I said, we lost some records in the flood. These might be copies of copies. Why? Just trying to understand my house better. Thanks for your help. Driving home, Marcus's grip on the steering wheel was tight. Someone had modified the house after it was built, created space that wasn't on the official records. That took deliberate effort and secrecy. Why would Holbrook do that? At home, after Keisha was fed and settled with her homework, Marcus went to the garage. He'd noticed some items left behind by the previous owner during the move. Boxes of old tools, some paint cans, the usual detritus that accumulated in garages over decades. He'd been meaning to sort through it all, decide what to keep and what to discard. Now he approached the task with different eyes, looking for clues rather than just junk. Most of it was ordinary. Screwdrivers worn smooth by decades of use, coffee cans filled with screws and nails, cardboard boxes that crumbled at his touch. But in the back corner, on a shelf high enough that Marcus needed a stepladder to reach, he found something interesting, a rolled-up paper thick with dust, tied with a piece of twine that fell apart when he touched it. Marcus carefully unrolled it on his workbench, weighing down the corners with cans of paint. It was a blueprint, hand-drawn, not professionally printed, but detailed and precise. His house, rendered in blue ink with measurements and notes in small, careful handwriting. And there, clearly marked on the drawing, was something that made his breath catch. An underground structure accessed from the driveway. A room, roughly 15 by 20 feet, labeled in neat letters. Workshop 7, the number 7. Same as on the key. Marcus's hands trembled as he traced the lines with his finger. The access point was marked exactly where the crack ran through his driveway. This wasn't just a crack, it was a seam, a deliberate breaking point designed to be opened. "Daddy." Marcus turned to find Keisha standing in the garage doorway, her backpack still on her shoulders. "Hey, baby girl. Thought you were doing homework," I finished. "What's that?" She approached the workbench, curious. Marcus hesitated, then decided she deserved the truth. She lived here too, and she'd been the one to notice the wall measurements didn't make sense. "It's a drawing of our house. But there's something here that isn't supposed to be here, a hidden room, underground." Keisha's eyes widened. "Like a secret basement. Sort of, see this?" He pointed to the driveway marking. "I think that crack outside isn't really a crack. I think it's a door. Can we open it?" "I don't know yet. Need to borrow some equipment, do this safely." He looked down at her serious face. "Are you scared?" She considered the question carefully. "A little, but also curious. Why would Mr. Holbrook hide a room? That's what I want to find out." The next day was Saturday. Marcus called Terence and asked to borrow his concrete saw. He didn't explain why, just said he needed to make some driveway repairs. Terence agreed immediately, offering to bring it over. "You're going to do it, aren't you?" Terence said when he arrived, eyeing the crack. "Open it up?" "Yeah." Marcus took the saw, feeling its weight. "Want to stay and see what's down there?" "Are you kidding?" "Wouldn't miss it for the world." But Marcus shook his head. "I appreciate it, but I need to do this with just me and Keisha. Family thing, you know?" Terence looked disappointed but nodded. "I get it. But call me after, okay? I want to know what you find." After Terence left, Marcus stood looking at the crack in the driveway. The concrete saw sat beside him, its blade catching the morning sunlight. Keisha stood next to him, unusually quiet. "You ready for this?" he asked. "Are you?" Fair question. Was he ready to discover whatever Howard Holbrook had hidden under his driveway more than half a century ago? Ready to potentially unleash something he'd rather not know about? But the scratching sounds, the key, the blueprint, it was all pointing him toward this moment. Some doors, once discovered, had to be opened. Let's find out what's down there. Marcus started the saw, its motor roaring to life. The blade bit into the concrete, sending up a spray of dust and chips. He worked carefully, following the crack, cutting along its length. The concrete was thick, but the saw was powerful. After 20 minutes, he'd cut a rectangle about 4 feet by 3 feet. He shut off the saw. In the sudden silence, he could hear his own heartbeat. Keisha handed him a crowbar without being asked, and together they worked to pry up the section of concrete. It lifted easier than it should have, and Marcus realized why. There was a reinforced wooden frame underneath, built to support the weight but designed to be removable. Someone had planned this carefully. The concrete slab tilted up and away, revealing a square opening. Inside, wooden steps descended into darkness. No, not steps. A ladder, built sturdy and strong, bolted to a concrete wall. Marcus knelt beside the opening, peering down. Cool air drifted up, carrying the smell of old earth and stale space. He could see about 8 feet down before the darkness swallowed everything, and there, set into the top rung of the ladder, was a metal plate with a keyhole. The number 7 was stamped beside it. Marcus pulled the rusted key from his pocket. His hand shook slightly as he inserted it into the lock. It resisted at first, decades of rust fighting him, but then click, the lock turned. The ladder shifted slightly, and Marcus realized the whole assembly had been secured in place. Now it was free to use. "Daddy?" Keisha's voice was small. "What's down there?" Marcus looked at the darkness waiting below, then at his daughter's worried face. "I don't know, baby girl, but I'm going to find out." Marcus stood at the edge of the opening, looking down into the darkness that had been sealed beneath his driveway for who knew how many years. Every instinct told him to be careful, to call someone official, maybe the police, maybe a building inspector. But something deeper, some primal curiosity, urged him forward. I want you to stay up here, he told Keisha firmly. This might not be safe, but Daddy, no arguments, baby girl. I need to know you're okay while I check this out. He pulled out his phone, turned on the flashlight. Actually, go ask Mrs. Alvarez if she can sit with you for a bit. Tell her I'm doing some work on the house. Keisha's face showed her disappointment, but she nodded and headed next door. Marcus watched her knock, saw Rosa Alvarez answer, and usher her inside with a concerned glance in his direction. He waved to show everything was fine, though he wasn't sure that was true. Once Keisha was safe, Marcus gathered supplies, his phone, a larger flashlight from the garage, a rope that he tied around his waist and secured to his truck's trailer hitch just in case. He wasn't taking chances with a ladder that might be 50 or 60 years old. He descended slowly, testing each rung before putting his full weight on it. The ladder held firm, and he realized the wood was actually in remarkable condition, as if it had been treated against rot and decay. Someone had built this to last. 12 rungs down, his feet touched solid ground. Marcus swept his flashlight around, and what he saw made him stop breathing for a moment. He was standing in a room, a real, finished room, carved out beneath his driveway and front yard. The walls were concrete, solid and dry. The ceiling was reinforced with metal beams. The floor was smooth concrete as well, painted a faded gray. The space was roughly the size his blueprint had indicated, maybe 15 by 20 feet, and it was furnished. Not like a storage room, but like someone had lived here. Against one wall stood a wooden workbench, its surface covered with a thick layer of dust, but still intact. Tools hung on a pegboard above it, saws, hammers, chisels, all carefully arranged. Beside the workbench, a wooden shelf unit held various items, an old radio, several books, boxes of various sizes. Marcus approached the workbench, his footsteps echoing in the enclosed space. The dust was so thick it looked like grey velvet. He touched nothing yet, just observed. The tools were high quality, well maintained. Someone had cared for these things. The shelves drew him next. He shone his light on the books, woodworking manuals from the 1950s and 60s, some in English, some in Spanish. Beside them sat wooden boxes, each one beautifully crafted with dovetail joints and smooth finishes. Marcus carefully opened one. Inside were hand-carved figurines, animals, people, decorative pieces. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, each piece showing attention to detail and genuine artistry. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds across all the boxes. Someone had spent countless hours down here, creating these beautiful objects. In the corner, Marcus found a small filing cabinet. This felt more intrusive somehow, like reading someone's diary. But he'd come this far. He needed to understand. The top drawer held papers, all neatly organized in folders. Marcus pulled out the first one, carefully opening it. Inside were letters written in English, dated from the 1950s and 60s. He read the first one, dated June 1955. My dearest friend, the work continues well. The room is nearly finished, and I believe it will serve its purpose. You were right to be cautious. The way people talk, the things they say, it's not safe yet, but it will be. We just need to wait, to be patient. Until then, you have a place here. You'll always have a place here. Your brother in all but blood, H. Marcus's hands trembled slightly. This wasn't just a workshop. Someone had built this as a sanctuary, a hiding place. But for whom and from what? He found more letters, all in the same handwriting. They spoke of friendship, of protection, of keeping someone safe. References to dangerous times and until the situation improves appeared frequently. Marcus realized he was reading about real fear, real danger that someone had faced. In another folder he found letters written in Spanish. He couldn't read them, but he recognized names at the bottom. Roberto, always Roberto. And the dates stretched from 1952 through 1967. Marcus pulled out his phone and used a translation app, photographing the letters and reading the translated text. They were journal entries, personal reflections. Roberto, the name appeared again and again, wrote about loneliness, about gratitude, about a man named Howard who had saved his life. Howard gave me more than shelter, one entry read. He gave me dignity. In a world that sees me as less than human, he sees me as his equal, his friend. I live in this underground room, yes, but I am not imprisoned. I am protected. There is a difference. Marcus sat down on the dusty floor, overwhelmed. This room, this carefully constructed space beneath his house, had been someone's home. Roberto's home. And Howard Holbrook, the man who'd owned this house for 66 years, had built it to protect him. More exploration revealed other details. A small cot in one corner, folded up and leaning against the wall. A hot plate for cooking, a stack of tin plates and cups. This wasn't just a hiding place. Someone had lived here for how long? Marcus found receipts, carefully filed, showing that Holbrook had sold wooden carvings. The money went to RM family, Guadalajara, Mexico. Roberto Mendoza, Marcus assumed. Holbrook had been sending money to Roberto's family while Roberto hid underground. Letters from Roberto's sister appeared in the files, written in Spanish, thanking them for the money, asking when Roberto would return home, expressing worry and hope. The letters stopped in 1968. Marcus found a photograph tucked into an envelope. Two men stood in front of his house, the same house but looking new, the siding bright, the lawn pristine. One man was clearly younger Howard Holbrook, based on an old newspaper photo Marcus had seen during his research. The other was Latino with dark hair and a warm smile. They stood with their arms around each other's shoulders, both grinning at the camera, the inscription on the back, written in faded ink. H.H. and R.M., 1955, brothers in all but blood. Marcus stared at the photo for a long time. This was Roberto. This was the man who'd lived under his driveway, who'd carved beautiful figurines in the darkness, who'd survived by the grace of a friend, who'd risked everything to protect him. What had happened to him? The letters stopped in 1968. Had he finally been able to leave, to return to Mexico, to live openly again? Or had something else happened? Marcus photographed everything. The letters, the room, the carvings, the photograph. This was history, real and painful and beautiful. It needed to be preserved. He climbed back up the ladder, emerging into bright sunshine that made him squint. Geisha and Rosa Alvarez stood waiting, both looking worried. "You were down there a long time," Rosa said. "I was about to call for help." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her. She'd lived next door since 1965. She'd been here during the years these letters were written. "Mrs. Alvarez, did you know Mr. Holbrook well?" Her expression changed, became guarded. "As well as anyone, I suppose. Why? Did you ever see anyone else here?" Another man, maybe Latino, working in the yard with him. Rosa's face went very still. She glanced at Keisha, then back at Marcus. "Perhaps we should talk inside. Just the adults." Marcus asked Keisha to go wash up for lunch, then followed Rosa into her kitchen. She sat down heavily, her hands folded on the table. "I always wondered," she said quietly. "About that room. You knew?" "I suspected. This was 1965 when I moved here. Different times, Mr. Webb. Dangerous times for some people." She looked up at him. "I saw two men sometimes working in the yard together. They were careful, but I noticed. And then one day, there was only Mr. Holbrook. I never asked. It was safer not to ask. What was his name?" "The other man?" "Roberto." Rosa's eyes were distant, remembering. "Roberto Mendoza. He was kind, always polite on the few occasions we spoke. And then he was gone. People assumed he'd been deported, or maybe he'd moved away. No one questioned it. What happened to him?" Rosa shook her head slowly. "I don't know. Mr. Holbrook never spoke of it. But after Roberto disappeared, Mr. Holbrook seemed diminished. Like a part of him had been taken away. He lived in that house another 50 years, but I always thought he was waiting for something that never came." Marcus felt the weight of those words. 50 years of waiting, of grief, of keeping a secret. And now that secret was his to carry. "There's more down there," Marcus said. "Letters, personal things. I think Roberto's family should know what happened to him." Rosa nodded slowly. "That would be the right thing to do. But finding them after all this time, that won't be easy." "No," Marcus agreed. "But I have to try." That evening, after Keisha was in bed, Marcus returned to the underground room. He sat on the floor, surrounded by decades-old letters and photographs, trying to piece together a story that mattered, that had been hidden too long. Whatever it took, he was going to find Roberto's family. He was going to tell them their relative had been loved, protected, and valued. That his life had meant something. It was the least he could do for the man who'd lived beneath his driveway, creating beauty in the darkness. Over the following weeks, Marcus became a man possessed. He spent his evenings in the underground room, carefully cataloguing every letter, every document, every carved piece. He photographed everything with meticulous care, organizing the images into folders on his laptop. During lunch breaks at work, he researched immigration history, trying to understand what Roberto might have been fleeing from. The picture that emerged was both clearer and more heartbreaking than he'd imagined. Roberto Mendoza had come to the United States in 1950, a veteran of the Korean War who'd served alongside American soldiers. The letters revealed he'd met Howard Holbrook during the war. They'd been in the same unit, had saved each other's lives more than once. When they returned to civilian life, Holbrook had encouraged Roberto to come north, promising work and a fresh start. For a few years, it had worked. Roberto found construction jobs, sent money home to his family in Guadalajara, built a life. But by the mid-1950s, the climate had shifted. Despite being a legal resident with proper papers, Roberto faced increasing harassment. Jobs disappeared. Threats appeared. His papers were questioned, lost by authorities, deliberately misplaced in bureaucratic tangles. One letter from 1964 detailed an incident that had clearly been the breaking point. Roberto had been attacked outside a job site, beaten badly enough to require hospital care. The police had done nothing. Holbrook's letter in response was filled with protective rage and determination. "I'm building something," Holbrook had written. "A place where you'll be safe until this madness passes. I won't let them destroy you, my brother. I won't." And so the underground room had been born. Constructed in secret, mostly at night, with Holbrook doing the work himself to avoid questions. Roberto had moved in sometime in late 1965, living there intermittently at first, above ground when it seemed safe. Below, when the threats increased, the letters showed Roberto's struggle with the arrangement. He was grateful, but also ashamed, hating that he needed to hide like a criminal when he'd done nothing wrong. Holbrook's responses were always gentle, always reassuring. "This doesn't diminish you. It reveals the sickness of the world, not any weakness in you." Marcus found himself reading and rereading these letters late into the night, sitting on his living room couch while Keisha slept. The friendship between these two men was profound, deeper than most people experienced in a lifetime. They'd saved each other in war, and Holbrook had continued saving Roberto in peace. The woodworking had been Roberto's salvation, the letters revealed. Unable to work legally, unable to show his face in public without risk, he'd poured his energy and creativity into carving. The figurines were his way of maintaining dignity, of producing something beautiful in the darkness. Holbrook had sold the pieces quietly, through contacts, never revealing who'd made them. The money went to Roberto's family, a sister named Luz in Guadalajara, who had 3 children and a husband who died young. Roberto's letters to her were filled with careful lies about his circumstances. He was doing well, he wrote. Working hard, saving money, would come home soon, but he never did. The last letter from Roberto was dated March 1968. It was addressed to whoever finds this room, and Marcus had discovered it tucked into a carved wooden music box. He'd found on a high shelf. The music box itself was extraordinary, decorated with intricate folk art patterns, obviously a labor of love. When Marcus carefully wound it, the mechanism still worked, playing a tune he didn't recognize, but that sounded distinctly Mexican. Later, he'd learn it was Cielito Lindo, a traditional song. Roberto's letter explained everything. "If you are reading this, then I have left this place one way or another. I write this in case I do not survive what comes next, so that someone might understand the truth of what happened here. My name is Roberto Mendoza. I have lived in this underground room for nearly 3 years, protected by the kindest, bravest man I have ever known. Howard Holbrook saved my life not once but many times. He gave me shelter when the world above wanted to destroy me simply for existing in the wrong place with the wrong color skin. But this is no life, living in darkness. Howard and I have made a plan. We have saved money. I will drive north in his truck, cross into Canada, start a new life where papers matter less than the man carrying them. Howard will report the truck stolen a day later, giving me time to reach safety. If something happens to me on this journey, please tell Howard this was not his fault. Tell him I died free, not hiding, and that his friendship made my life meaningful even when circumstances made it small. To whoever you are, reading this in some distant future, I hope the world you live in is kinder than mine. I hope no one has to hide in an underground room simply for trying to exist. Thank you for listening to a dead man's words. May you never know the fear that shaped them. Marcus had wept when he first read that letter. He wept again now, sitting alone in his living room at midnight, the weight of Roberto's story pressing on his chest. He'd found more, too. Newspaper articles from April 1968, small notices he'd tracked down through library archives. A traffic accident on Highway 40, a single-vehicle collision. The driver had died at the scene. The articles didn't name him, referring only to a transient driving a vehicle registered to Howard Holbrook. The investigation had been brief. Accidental death. Case closed, but Marcus understood what had really happened. Roberto had been trying to reach Canada, trying to reach freedom. Something had gone wrong. A mistake, bad weather, bad luck. It didn't matter. He died on that highway, alone, still running. And Holbrook had lived with that knowledge for 50 more years, never speaking of it, never revealing what he'd lost. Marcus researched more, finding Holbrook's obituary from 2018. Howard Holbrook, 93, died peacefully at Riverside Nursing Home. A lifelong resident of the area, Mr. Holbrook was known for his quiet generosity and skilled craftsmanship. He is survived by no immediate family, because the person who'd been his family, his true family, had died on a highway in 1968, trying to escape persecution. Keisha noticed her father's distraction. "Daddy, are you okay?" she asked one evening after dinner. "You seem sad." Marcus pulled her onto his lap, holding her close. "I'm learning about the people who lived in our house before us. Their story is sad, but also beautiful. Does that make sense?" "I think so. Like when we read that book about the dog who died saving his owner. Sad but also brave." "Exactly like that, baby girl. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones that hurt." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Are you going to find Roberto's family?" "I'm going to try. They deserve to know what happened to him. That he was loved, that he mattered. Will they be mad? That he died?" Marcus considered this carefully. Maybe sad, angry, confused, all of it. "But I hope they'll also be glad to know the truth. That's better than wondering forever." That night, Marcus drafted a letter in English, then used an online service to have it professionally translated into Spanish. He addressed it to the last known location in Guadalajara from Roberto's letters, though he knew the chances of anyone still living there after 50 years were slim. The letter was difficult to write. How did you tell a family that their relative had died alone decades ago, trying to escape to safety? How did you explain that he'd lived underground for years, hidden like a criminal, despite having done nothing wrong? In the end, Marcus focused on what mattered most. Roberto had been loved. He'd been protected. He'd created beautiful things. His life had meaning and value, even when the world tried to strip those things away. Howard Holbrook had given him sanctuary, and that sanctuary had been built on genuine friendship and care. He included his phone number, his email address, and several photographs, the picture of Roberto and Holbrook together, and images of some of Roberto's carved figurines. Marcus mailed the letter, knowing it would probably disappear into the void. 57 years was too long. People moved, died, forgot. The chances of this reaching anyone who remembered Roberto Mendoza were microscopically small, but he had to try. Days turned into weeks. Marcus fell into a routine: work, parenting, maintaining the house, and spending time in the underground room. He'd started to think of it differently now, not as a hidden room, but as a memorial. He cleaned it carefully, organized Roberto's belongings with respect, treated it like the sacred space it had been. The scratching sounds had stopped completely. Marcus realized they'd ceased the moment he found the key, as if the house itself had been trying to tell him something, trying to ensure Roberto's story wouldn't remain hidden forever. Mrs. Alvarez helped when she could, sharing memories of the neighborhood in the 1960s, filling in details that brought the era to life. She'd been a young woman then, newly arrived from Puerto Rico herself, understanding from personal experience the casual cruelty that people like Roberto faced. "We didn't talk about it," she explained one afternoon over coffee in Marcus's kitchen. "It wasn't safe to notice certain things, to ask certain questions. You kept your head down, you survived. That's how it was. You think anyone else knew? About the room?" Rosa considered this. Maybe some suspected. But knowing and acknowledging are different things. Better not to know in those times, safer. Marcus thought about that. A whole neighborhood implicitly choosing not to see, not to ask. Not from malice, but from self-preservation. It made him both sad and angry, though he understood it too. Then, 6 weeks after he'd mailed the letter, his phone rang with an international number. Marcus stared at his phone for 3 rings before his hand stopped shaking enough to answer. "Hello, Mr. Webb." The woman's voice was accented, but her English was clear and careful. "My name is Valentina Cruz. I'm calling from Guadalajara. I received your letter about my uncle Roberto." Marcus sat down hard on his couch, his heart hammering. "Mrs. Cruz, thank you for calling. I wasn't sure the letter would reach anyone. It took some time. The address you had was old, but the postal worker knew my cousin, who knew my mother's old house, had been sold to a family who had our phone number. Small miracles." She paused. "You said you found my uncle's belongings. You said he lived in a room under your house." "Yes, I found everything, letters, his carvings, photographs. Mrs. Cruz, your uncle was an incredibly talented artist. The things he made are beautiful." There was a long silence. When Valentina spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "We thought he forgot about us. He sent money for years, letters every few months, and then nothing. My mother, his sister Luz, she waited her whole life to know what happened. She died in 1995 without ever learning the truth." Marcus closed his eyes. "I'm so sorry. I wish I could have found you sooner. Tell me everything, please. Whatever you know about his life, about how he—" Her voice broke. "About how he died." For the next hour, Marcus told her everything. He read her portions of the letters, described the underground room, explained the historical context as best he understood it. He told her about Howard Holbrook's protection, about Roberto's woodworking, about the plan to escape to Canada that had gone so tragically wrong. Valentina wept quietly through much of it. When Marcus finished, she was silent for a long moment. "I was 8 years old the last time I saw Tio Roberto," she finally said. "He came to visit before he left for the United States. He gave me a wooden doll he'd carved, told me he'd send for us once he made enough money. I still have that doll. I'm 68 years old and I still have it." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "He never stopped thinking about you. The letters to your grandmother, his sister, they were full of love and longing. He wanted to come home, but he couldn't because people wouldn't let him be." There was anger in her voice now, righteous and raw. Because he had the wrong papers, wrong skin, wrong accent. So he had to hide in the ground like an animal. "He was protected there," Marcus said gently. "Howard Holbrook risked everything to keep him safe." "I know. I understand that." Valentina took a shaky breath. "This man, Holbrook, you said he kept the room sealed after my uncle died?" "Yes, for 50 years. He never sold the house, never spoke about it. I think your uncle was more than just his friend." "What do you mean?" Marcus hesitated, then decided she deserved the full truth. The letters between them, the way they wrote to each other, it wasn't just friendship. "I think they loved each other, Mrs. Cruz, deeply." Another long silence. Marcus waited, giving her time to process. In our family, in our time, that would have been impossible to speak of. Valentina said slowly, But I have grandchildren now. I understand the world differently than my mother did. If my uncle found love in that dark time with someone who protected him, then I am glad. Love should be celebrated, not hidden. Marcus felt relief wash through him. Thank you for understanding that. What happened to Holbrook? Did he live long? He died 3 years ago, age 93. Alone, as far as I can tell. He lost your uncle and spent the rest of his life carrying that grief. Then they both suffered, Valentina said quietly. Both of them, for the crime of loving in a world that wouldn't allow it. They talked for another half hour. Valentina told him about her family, 3 adult children, 7 grandchildren. She taught English literature at a university in Guadalajara. Her mother had passed on stories about Roberto, keeping his memory alive, even though they'd never learned what happened to him. I want to come there, Valentina said finally. I want to see this room, to see where my uncle spent his final years. Would that be possible? Of course, absolutely. You're welcome here any time. I'll need to arrange time away from work, but perhaps in a few weeks. I'd like to bring my daughter Sophia, if that's acceptable. And maybe my grandson Miguel, he's 16, studying history. This would mean a lot to him. Bring whoever you'd like. This is your family's story as much as mine. After they hung up, Marcus sat in the quiet of his living room, processing everything. In 3 weeks, Roberto's family would be here. They would descend into that underground room and confront the reality of what their relative had endured. Marcus needed to prepare, needed to make sure everything was preserved properly. The next day, he contacted the local historical society. A woman named Patricia Brennan came out to look at the room, and her reaction confirmed what Marcus had suspected. This was historically significant. This needs to be documented, she said, standing in the underground space with her camera. Not just the room, but the letters, the carvings, everything. This is living history, Mr. Webb, a testament to a time we'd rather forget, but desperately need to remember. I want it preserved, Marcus said. But respectfully, this was someone's home, someone's sanctuary. It's not just an exhibit. I understand completely. We can help with that. Proper archival storage for the documents, climate control, security. And if you're willing, we could arrange for scholars to study this, to ensure Roberto Mendoza's story is told properly. Over the following weeks, Marcus worked with the Historical Society to document everything. Professional photographers came through. Historians examined the letters. Experts evaluated the carved pieces. The story began to leak out into the community. A mysterious room, a hidden history, a tale of friendship and survival. The local newspaper requested an interview. Marcus agreed, but insisted they wait until Roberto's family had visited, until they'd had a chance to see the room themselves. Some stories needed to be told in the right order, with the right people present. Keisha helped prepare the house for visitors. Together they cleaned, organized, made sure the guest bedroom was ready. She was excited about meeting Miguel, the grandson who was close to her age. Well, 8 years older, but still young enough to relate to. What if they're sad when they see the room? She asked one evening. They probably will be, Marcus admitted, but maybe also grateful. Sometimes sadness and gratitude go together, like when you talk about Grandpa. You're sad he's gone, but happy you had him. Exactly like that, baby girl. The night before Valentina was due to arrive, Marcus went down into the room one final time to make sure everything was ready. He'd set up better lighting, installed a dehumidifier to protect the documents, arranged Roberto's carvings on the shelves so they could be properly appreciated. He stood in the center of the space, slowly turning in a circle, taking it all in. This room had been built with love, lived in with dignity, sealed with grief, and now would be opened with understanding. Roberto's story would finally be told, his life finally acknowledged. I hope I'm doing right by you, Marcus said to the empty room. Both of you, Roberto and Howard. I hope you'd be okay with this, with people knowing. The room was silent, but it felt different now. Not lonely anymore, not hidden. The scratching sounds had been the house itself, Marcus believed, trying to make sure its secrets didn't die with the men who'd created them. He climbed back up into the evening air. Tomorrow would bring answers, closure, and connection. Tomorrow, The past would finally meet the present. Marcus went inside and pulled out his phone, scrolling through the photographs he'd taken of Roberto and Howard together. Two young men, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera without any idea of the tragedy that awaited them. "She's coming," he whispered to the photograph. "Your niece is coming to see what you built, to understand who you were. You won't be forgotten, Roberto. Not anymore." He set the phone down and went to check on Keisha, finding her already asleep with a book on her chest. He carefully removed it, marked her page, and tucked her blanket around her shoulders. Tomorrow they would welcome strangers who weren't really strangers at all. Tomorrow they would share their home with the family that should have been able to share it all along. Tomorrow, justice delayed would finally arrive. 57 years late, but still meaningful. Marcus settled into his own bed, exhausted but unable to sleep. His mind raced with questions and concerns. What would Valentina think of the room? Would she be angry that Roberto had been forced to hide? Would she understand the complexity of what Howard had done, the protection and the isolation that came with it? And there was something else, something Marcus hadn't mentioned to Valentina yet, something he'd discovered in the last few days while preparing the room. Something that changed everything about the legal ownership of his house. That conversation could wait until she arrived. Some things needed to be said face to face, with honesty and openness. Marcus finally drifted off near dawn, his dreams filled with underground rooms and old photographs, with scratching sounds that transformed into whispered voices saying, "Tell our story. Please tell our story." He woke with Keisha shaking his shoulder. "Daddy, they'll be here in 2 hours. We need to get ready." And so they did, preparing to welcome the past into their present, to bridge 57 years with understanding and compassion. The doorbell rang at exactly 10 o'clock. Valentina Cruz was smaller than Marcus had imagined, barely 5 feet tall, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a braid. But her eyes were sharp and warm, and when she looked at Marcus, he saw Roberto in her features. The same nose, the same shape to her face. "Mr. Webb." She took his hand in both of hers. "Thank you for finding us, for finding my uncle. Please, call me Marcus, and this is my daughter, Keisha." Keisha stepped forward, suddenly shy. "Hello." "Hello, sweet girl." Valentina's smile was genuine. "Thank you for sharing your home with us." Behind her stood a woman in her 40s, Sophia, clearly Valentina's daughter, with the same intelligent eyes, and a teenage boy, tall and lanky, who Marcus assumed was Miguel. They gathered in the living room, and for a few minutes there was awkward small talk, the flight, the hotel, the weather. Then Valentina set down her teacup and looked directly at Marcus. "I'd like to see the room now, if that's all right." Marcus nodded. "Of course, it's outside under the driveway. I should warn you, it's emotional. Take whatever time you need." They walked out together, all of them, and stood around the opening Marcus had cut in the concrete. He'd installed a more permanent cover now, with a hatch that could be opened easily. The ladder had been reinforced, made safe for regular use. Marcus descended first, turning on the lights he'd installed. Then he helped Valentina down, her hands trembling slightly as she climbed. Sophia and Miguel followed, with Keisha and Rosa Alvarez, who'd come to offer support, remaining above ground. Valentina stood at the bottom of the ladder, not moving, just looking. Her hand covered her mouth, and tears streamed down her face. "He lived here," she whispered. "My uncle lived in this room." Marcus stayed silent, letting her process. Sophia put an arm around her mother's shoulders, her own eyes wet. Valentina walked slowly through the space, touching the workbench, running her fingers over the tools. She picked up one of the carved figurines, a small bird with spread wings, and held it like something sacred. "He made these in the darkness," she said. "Created beauty while hiding from the world." She found the photograph Marcus had carefully placed on a small shelf, the one of Roberto and Howard together. She picked it up, studying it intently. "They look happy," she said. "In this moment, they look happy." "I think they were," Marcus said quietly, "as happy as they could be, given the circumstances. Valentina read some of the letters Marcus had preserved in protective sleeves. She sang along softly when Marcus played the music box, recognizing Cielito Lindo immediately. Miguel took photographs with his phone, documenting everything with a historian's careful attention. After an hour, they climbed back up. Valentina looked exhausted, but also relieved, as if a weight she'd carried for decades had finally been lifted. Back in the living room, Marcus knew he couldn't delay any longer. He needed to tell them what he'd found. Mrs. Cruz, Valentina, there's something else I need to show you. He pulled out a folder he'd been keeping in his bedroom. I found this a few days ago, hidden in the underground room. I wanted to wait until you were here to discuss it. He discovered it behind a false panel in the concrete wall, a cavity so cleverly disguised that he'd only found it by accident while installing the dehumidifier. Inside had been a metal deed, box, fireproof and watertight, preserved perfectly over the decades. Marcus opened the folder now and spread documents across his coffee table. Valentina leaned forward, her expression confused. What is this? Property documents. Legal papers. Marcus took a breath. In 1965, Howard Holbrook amended the deed to this house. He added Roberto's name as co-owner. They owned it together, 50-50. Valentina's eyes widened. But how? There's more. Marcus pulled out another document. A life insurance policy, with Roberto listed as beneficiary. Bank accounts in both their names. And this... He showed her the most significant document, his hands shaking slightly. A marriage license from San Francisco, 1964. The room went completely silent. Valentina stared at the document, then looked up at Marcus. They were married? Yes. Before it was legal in most places, they found a way, and Holbrook made Roberto a legal owner of this property. When Roberto died, his share should have passed to his heirs, to his family. Marcus met her eyes. Valentina, legally speaking, half of this house belongs to you and your family. Valentina looked shocked. Sophia leaned in, examining the documents with wide eyes. Miguel whispered something in Spanish. I don't understand, Valentina said. If this is true, how did you buy the house? The title company missed it. The documents were filed, but somehow got lost in the system. Probably during that flood in the 70s that damaged so many records. The trust designation was never properly maintained. When Holbrook died and the estate was settled, nobody knew about Roberto's ownership stake. Marcus pulled out one more document, a letter from a lawyer dated 1972. Holbrook tried to find Roberto's family after he died. He wanted to honor the arrangement, wanted the property to go to Roberto's relatives, but he couldn't locate anyone. Eventually, the lawyer advised him that without heirs coming forward, the property would default to him alone. But Holbrook never changed the deed. He left it as is, hoping someday someone would find it. And you did, Valentina said softly. I did. Which means... Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. Which means my purchase of this house may not be legally valid. You have a legitimate claim to at least half of it, maybe more. A lawyer could argue that the entire property should pass to Roberto's heirs. The silence stretched out. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, could see Keisha watching from the doorway with worried eyes. Finally, Valentina spoke. You're saying, we could take this house from you. I'm saying it's legally yours, or at least partly yours. I won't fight it. It would be wrong to keep something that rightfully belongs to your family. Sophia said something in rapid Spanish. Valentina responded, and they had a quick, intense conversation that Marcus couldn't follow. Miguel joined in, his voice earnest. Then Valentina turned back to Marcus, and her expression was difficult to read. Let me understand this correctly. You discovered that my uncle was part owner of this house. You realized that my family has a legal claim, and instead of staying quiet about it, hoping we'd never find out, you're telling us directly. Yes, even though it means you could lose your home, the home you worked so hard to buy, where you're raising your daughter. Marcus nodded. It's the right thing to do. Your uncle and Howard Holbrook wanted this property to go to Roberto's family. I can't ignore that, even if it costs me everything." Valentina stared at him for a long moment, then looked around the room, at the house Roberto had helped own, had lived beneath, had died trying to return to. "My uncle," she said slowly, "spent years hiding in the dark because the world wouldn't accept him. Howard Holbrook risked everything to protect him. They built a life together despite impossible circumstances." She stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the quiet street. "They wanted this house to be a sanctuary, a place of safety." She turned back to Marcus. "You and your daughter need sanctuary too. Different circumstances, different challenges, but the same fundamental need for a place to call home. Mrs. Cruz," she held up a hand. "Let me finish. You found my uncle's story. You honored it. You sought out his family when you could have just kept silent. You've treated his memory with dignity and respect." She paused. "Taking this house from you would not honor his memory. It would betray the very values he stood for: kindness, compassion, helping those who need help." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to, but I want to." Valentina looked at her daughter and grandson, who both nodded. "We don't need this house. We have homes in Mexico, we have lives there, but you need it. Keisha needs it, and I think my uncle would want it this way." "There has to be something," Marcus said. "Some way to honor the legal reality while also being fair." Valentina smiled. "Then we'll figure it out together. Perhaps the property can be deeded to you properly, with an acknowledgement of its history. Perhaps the underground room can be preserved as a memorial. Perhaps we can find a way to tell this story publicly, so my uncle and Howard aren't forgotten." Sophia spoke up. "We could establish a historical designation, make sure the room is protected, that the story is shared. That would mean more to us than owning property we'd never use." Miguel added, "People should know what happened here, what they endured, what they meant to each other. That's worth more than money." Marcus looked at Keisha, who had come into the room and now stood beside him. She looked up at him with those wise 8-year-old eyes. "They're like us, Daddy. They want to do the right thing too." And that was exactly it. This wasn't about legal claims or property rights. It was about carrying forward the values that Roberto and Howard had lived by: compassion, sacrifice, love. "Thank you," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for understanding." Valentina came over and took his hand. "No, Mr. Webb, thank you for finding my uncle, for finding us, for giving us the gift of knowing what happened to him. That's worth more than any house." The next 2 days felt like a whirlwind. Marcus contacted his friend Lawrence Bryant, an attorney who'd helped him with the house purchase. Lawrence came over that evening, reviewed all the documents Marcus had found, and confirmed what Marcus already suspected. The situation was legally complex, but morally clear. "Technically, Roberto's heirs have a strong claim," Lawrence explained, spreading papers across Marcus's kitchen table while Valentina and her family listened. "The marriage license, the amended deed, the joint ownership, it's all legitimate. The estate should have been divided, with half going to Roberto's family. But they don't want it," Marcus said, "which makes things simpler, actually." Lawrence adjusted his glasses. "We can file paperwork, acknowledging the historical ownership while transferring full title to Marcus. It'll require court approval, but since all parties agree, it should be straightforward." Valentina nodded. "What we want is recognition. The story told properly. The room preserved, both men's names honored. That matters more than ownership." Over coffee and pan dulce that Valentina had brought from a Mexican bakery near their hotel, they discussed how to move forward. The local historical society would help document everything, creating an archive of letters and photographs. The underground room would be designated a historical site, protected and preserved. But there was more to discuss, something that had been weighing on Marcus's mind. "What about Holbrook's grave?" he asked. "I visited it last week. It's just his name and dates. No mention of Roberto, nothing about who he really was or what he lost." Valentina's expression grew thoughtful. "Where is he buried?" "Riverside Cemetery, about 3 miles from here." Simple headstone, very plain. We should visit tomorrow, Valentina said quietly. All of us. It feels right to pay our respects, to tell him we know the truth now. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in bed thinking about everything that had happened, finding the key, discovering the room, connecting with Roberto's family. It felt like destiny, like the house itself had chosen him for this purpose. Around midnight, he got up and went outside to the opening in the driveway. He climbed down into the underground room, now illuminated by the soft lights he'd installed. He sat on the floor where Roberto had sat decades ago, trying to imagine what it had been like, the loneliness, the fear, the determination to survive. "I hope I'm doing right by you both," he whispered to the empty room. "I'm trying." The next morning, they all drove to Riverside Cemetery. It was a sprawling place with old oaks and manicured grass, peaceful and well-maintained. Marcus led them to Holbrook's grave, a simple grey stone with minimal inscription, Howard Holbrook, 1925-2018, beloved neighbor. Beloved neighbor, Valentina read aloud. Not beloved husband, not beloved partner. Just neighbor. She knelt by the stone, placed her hand on it. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "Mr. Holbrook, my name is Valentina. I'm Roberto's niece. I came to thank you for loving my uncle, for protecting him, for giving him dignity when the world tried to take it away. I'm sorry you had to hide that love. I'm sorry the world made you both suffer for it." Sophia knelt beside her mother, wiping tears from her eyes. Miguel stood with his head bowed, respectful and solemn. Even Keisha was quiet, sensing the weight of the moment. "We're going to fix this," Valentina continued. "We're going to make sure people know your story, both of your stories. You won't be forgotten, either of you." Marcus had brought Roberto's wooden cross, the one he'd found in the underground room, a beautifully carved crucifix that Roberto had made for himself. He placed it at the base of Holbrook's headstone. "They should be together," he said. "At least in memory." Rosa Alvarez, who had come along at Valentina's invitation, spoke up. "I remember him after Roberto disappeared. He was like a man walking through fog, never quite present. He was kind, he helped neighbors, he lived his life, but there was always something missing. Now I understand why." They stood in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally Valentina stood and turned to Marcus. "We should commission a new memorial. Something that tells the truth." "I'll help with that," Marcus said immediately. "Oh, whatever it costs. We'll share the expense," Valentina insisted. "This is family business now, yours and ours together." Over lunch at a small diner, they discussed specifics. They'd hire a stonemason to create a new memorial marker, one that acknowledged both men properly. The wording would be careful but honest. Partners, friends, souls bound together across time. Lawrence would handle the legal aspects, ensuring the property transfer was done correctly while establishing the historical designation for the underground room. The local LGBTQ+ community center had already reached out, interested in helping preserve the site as a testament to hidden histories. "This is bigger than just our family," Sophia observed. "It's about all the people who had to hide, who couldn't live openly. Roberto and Howard's story represents thousands of untold stories, which is why it needs to be told right," Marcus agreed, with respect but also with honesty. No sugarcoating what they endured. Valentina looked at him with warm appreciation. "You understand. Not everyone would." That afternoon they returned to the house. Valentina wanted to see the room one more time before they flew back to Mexico. This time Marcus let Keisha come down too. She stood in the center of the space, slowly turning, taking it all in. "It's sad," she said finally, "but also brave. He didn't give up even when things were scary." "No, he didn't," Valentina agreed. "And neither did Howard. They found a way to protect each other, to love each other, despite everything the world threw at them." As they prepared to leave, Valentina pulled Marcus aside. "Stay in touch," she said. "Visit us in Guadalajara when you can. You're part of this story now, part of our family's history. We want Keisha to know her cousins, for our families to stay connected." "I'd like that," Marcus said. "More than you know. They exchanged contact information, made promises to call and video chat regularly. Miguel and Keisha had already become friends, talking about school and music and the strangeness of this whole situation. At the airport, their goodbyes were emotional but hopeful. Valentina hugged Marcus tightly. "Thank you for having the courage to tell us. Thank you for honoring my uncle's memory. Thank you for understanding," Marcus replied. "For choosing compassion. That's what family does," she said simply. 3 months later, Marcus stood in Riverside Cemetery on a crisp November morning, watching a small crowd gather around Howard Holbrook's grave. The old headstone had been removed, and in its place stood something new, something that finally told the truth. The memorial was elegant in its simplicity. Grey granite polished to a soft sheen, with words carved deep enough to last centuries. Howard Holbrook, 1925-2018, Roberto Mendoza, 1927-1968. Partners in life, separated by circumstance, united in memory. In a time when the world demanded they hide, they chose love, courage, and dignity. May their story remind us that sanctuary is both a place and a promise we make to one another. Marcus had worked with Valentina over countless phone calls and video chats to get the wording right. Every word had been carefully chosen, debated, refined. It needed to honor both men while being honest about what they'd endured. Valentina had flown back for the dedication ceremony, bringing Sofia and Miguel again. They stood beside Marcus and Keisha, a family united by unexpected circumstances. Rosa Alvarez was there too, along with Terence and several other neighbors who'd heard the story. Representatives from the local historical society attended, as did members from the LGBTQ+ community center. The mayor had even sent someone to officially recognize the historical designation of the underground room, a local pastor, one who'd been recommended by the community center as someone who understood, stepped forward to say a few words. "We gather today to honor 2 men who lived in a time when their love was considered criminal, their partnership impossible. They survived through courage and sacrifice. One built a sanctuary. The other lived in that sanctuary, creating beauty in darkness." The pastor spoke about the importance of remembering hidden histories, of acknowledging the suffering of those who came before. "We cannot change the past, but we can ensure it's not forgotten. We can learn from it, grow from it, become better because of it." When the pastor finished, Valentina stepped forward. She'd prepared something to say, written it down, but now she folded the paper and spoke from her heart. "I never knew my uncle Roberto," she began, her voice clear despite the emotion. "He left for the United States before I was born. But I grew up with his shadow, the family member who never came home, the question no one could answer." She placed her hand on the memorial stone. "Now I know his story. I know he was brave. I know he was loved. I know he created beautiful things with his hands and touched lives in ways he never got to see. And I know that Howard Holbrook gave him something precious, the gift of being seen, of being valued, of being protected." Valentina's voice wavered. "To love someone is to risk everything for them. Howard did that. He risked his reputation, his safety, his entire life to protect my uncle. And when Roberto died trying to reach freedom, Howard carried that grief alone for 50 years. She looked at Marcus. Then a single father and his daughter moved into their house. And instead of ignoring the scratching sounds in the walls, instead of covering up the mysteries they found, they chose to seek the truth. They chose to honor a story that wasn't even theirs. Marcus felt his throat tighten as she continued. "Marcus Webb is the kind of person Howard would have respected, the kind of person Roberto would have called friend, because when faced with a choice between keeping a secret that benefited him or revealing a truth that might cost him everything, he chose truth." The crowd murmured appreciatively. Marcus felt Keisha squeeze his hand. "So we dedicate this memorial, not just to 2 men who loved each other in impossible times," Valentina concluded, "but to everyone who builds sanctuaries for others, everyone who protects the vulnerable, everyone who says, 'You are safe here, you are valued here, you belong here.'" She stepped back, and Sophia moved forward, carrying a cloth bundle. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing one of Roberto's carved figurines, a dove with spread wings, symbol of peace and freedom. "This belonged to my great-uncle," Sophia said. "He made it in that underground room, in the darkness, when he couldn't fly free himself. We're leaving it here, so a piece of him can finally rest beside the man who loved him." She placed the carving at the base of the memorial. Miguel added a bouquet of marigolds, traditional Mexican flowers, for honoring the dead. Then Marcus stepped forward, Keisha beside him. He'd brought something too, the photograph of Roberto and Howard together, the one from 1955 that showed them young and hopeful, arms around each other's shoulders. He'd had it professionally preserved in a weatherproof frame. "This is how they should be remembered," Marcus said quietly. "Not hiding, not separated, but together, happy, the way they deserve to be." He placed the frame against the memorial. The photo showed two men who'd found each other in the aftermath of war, who'd built a life together despite everything. Their smiles were genuine, their bond visible even across decades. Rosa Alvarez stepped forward next, her movements slow but deliberate. "I lived next door for 53 years. I saw things I never spoke about because it wasn't safe to see them. But I'm speaking now." Her voice grew stronger. "Howard Holbrook was a good man. He helped neighbors, fixed things, never asked for anything in return. I didn't know about Roberto, not really, but I suspected. And I stayed silent." She paused, tears streaming down her weathered face. "That silence was wrong. We were all wrong. Everyone who saw and didn't speak, who suspected and didn't ask. We let fear make us complicit. So I'm speaking now for the record, for history. Howard Holbrook loved Roberto Mendoza. He protected him, honored him, grieved him. And that love was beautiful and right, no matter what the law said at the time. The crowd was silent, moved by her confession and testimony. Other neighbors stepped forward one by one, adding their own small tributes. Flowers, candles, words of respect. The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence. Marcus stood with his eyes closed, feeling the November wind on his face, thinking about the two men who'd started this whole journey. They'd never know that their story would eventually be told, that their love would finally be acknowledged. But somehow, Marcus hoped they knew, hoped they felt the recognition, the honor, the justice finally served. Afterward, people lingered, taking photos, reading the inscription, talking quietly among themselves. The Historical Society representative approached Marcus with information about the plaque that would be installed at the house, officially designating the underground room as a historical site. "We've had inquiries from researchers, journalists, educators," she explained. "Everyone wants to know more about this story. With your permission, we'd like to coordinate visits, create educational materials, as long as it's done respectfully," Marcus said. "This isn't just a historical curiosity. These were real people who suffered real pain." "Absolutely. We'll make sure of that." As the crowd dispersed, Marcus and Valentina stood together before the memorial, neither speaking, just being present in the moment. Finally, Valentina said, "Thank you for all of this. Thank you for letting me be part of it. Your family now." "That's not going to change." The courthouse was quieter than Marcus expected. He'd imagined something more dramatic, a packed courtroom, maybe opposition from some distant relative or legal complication. Instead, it was just him, Lawrence Bryant, Valentina and her family, and a judge who'd reviewed their case with what seemed like genuine interest. "This is an unusual situation," Judge Patricia Morrison said, looking over her reading glasses at the assembled parties. She was in her 60s, with grey hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that Marcus found reassuring. "Mr. Webb, you discovered that your property purchase was technically invalid due to previously unknown co-ownership by Mr. Roberto Mendoza, deceased. And Mrs. Cruz, as Mr. Mendoza's closest living relative, you're voluntarily relinquishing any claim to the property." "That's correct, Your Honor," Valentina said clearly. "We believe this serves the best interests of everyone involved, including honoring the wishes of both Roberto Mendoza and Howard Holbrook." The judge reviewed the documents again. The original deed showing joint ownership, The marriage certificate, Roberto's death certificate from 1968, family tree documentation proving Valentina's relationship to Roberto, and the voluntary transfer agreement she and her family had signed. I've read the background materials, Judge Morrison said. The historical significance of this case is remarkable. Two men, married in an era when such unions were barely recognized anywhere, with one providing sanctuary to the other during a dangerous time. She looked up. This is exactly the kind of hidden history that deserves to be preserved. She turned to Marcus. Mr. Webb, you didn't have to disclose any of this. You could have kept the documents hidden, maintained your ownership without anyone questioning it. Why didn't you? Marcus had prepared for this question, but now the prepared answer seemed insufficient. He spoke from the heart instead, because it was the right thing to do, Your Honor. Roberto Mendoza lived in hiding for years, unable to claim his own life, his own identity. Howard Holbrook kept their love secret for 5 decades after Roberto died. Enough hiding, enough secrets. They deserved to be acknowledged, and that meant telling the truth, even if it cost me. Judge Morrison nodded slowly. The court appreciates your honesty and integrity. Mr. Webb, she reviewed the paperwork one more time, then signed with deliberate strokes. The court finds that the voluntary transfer agreement is valid and executed with full understanding by all parties. The property located at 847 Maple Street is hereby officially deeded to Marcus Webb, with the historical covenant attached, requiring preservation of the underground structure and acknowledgement of its significance. She handed the signed documents to the clerk, then looked at the group. I'm also approving the historical designation. The site will be protected under state historical preservation laws. Mr. Webb, you'll retain full ownership and residence rights, but the underground room must be maintained and made available for educational purposes under reasonable terms. I understand. Your Honor, that's exactly what we want. Good. Judge Morrison's expression softened slightly. I've been a judge for 28 years. Most cases are disputes, people fighting over money, property, custody. It's rare to see a case where everyone involved is trying to do the right thing, trying to honor the past while building a better future. She paused. This gives me hope. After the hearing, they gathered on the courthouse steps. Lawrence organized the paperwork into folders, while Valentina embraced Marcus. It's really over, she said. The legal part, anyway. The legal part, Marcus agreed. But the rest, the story, the memorial, staying connected, that's just beginning. Sophia checked her phone. The Historical Society just posted about the designation on social media. People are already commenting, sharing it. Miguel showed them the screen. Dozens of comments were appearing, people moved by the story, sharing their own experiences of hidden histories, of family secrets finally revealed, of love that had to hide. Look at this one, Miguel said, reading aloud. My grandfather was gay but never came out. He died alone, and we never knew the truth until we found letters after he passed. This story gives me hope that his life mattered too. There are hundreds like this. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility. This wasn't just about Roberto and Howard anymore. It was about everyone whose stories had been buried, whose lives had been erased or ignored. That evening, back at the house, Marcus made dinner while Keisha set the table. Valentina's family had returned to their hotel to pack. They were flying home the next morning, but they'd be back for dinner in an hour. Daddy, is everything really okay now? Keisha asked, carefully arranging forks and knives. Yeah, baby girl. Everything's okay. The house is legally ours, the room is protected, and Roberto and Howard's story will be told properly. Are you going to miss Mrs. Cruz and her family? Of course. But they'll visit, and maybe we'll go see them in Mexico sometime. That's how family works. You stay connected even across distances. Keisha was quiet for a moment, thinking. We have a big family now. Bigger than before, Marcus smiled. We do. Pretty amazing, isn't it? A few months ago, it was just you and me. Now we have Valentina, Sophia, Miguel, and we're connected to Roberto's whole family history. And Roberto and Howard, too. They're kind of like family now, even though they're gone. Exactly like that. The doorbell rang, Valentina and her family arriving early. Marcus opened the door to find them carrying bags of groceries. "We decided to cook," Valentina announced. "Proper Mexican dinner, Roberto's family recipes that his sister passed down." It seemed fitting. They crowded into Marcus's small kitchen, laughing and talking over each other as Valentina directed the cooking. She taught Marcus how to make proper tamales, while Sofia prepared rice and Miguel made fresh salsa. Keisha helped where she could, learning and asking questions. As they worked, Valentina told stories about Roberto that his sister had shared, childhood memories, funny incidents, the kind of details that made him real rather than just a name in old letters. "He was terrible at football," she said, laughing. "All the boys played, and Roberto tried so hard, but he was clumsy. Instead, he'd sit and whittle little figures from sticks while watching them play. That's how his carving started, making toys from whatever wood he could find. His sister must have been proud of him," Marcus said. "She was, but also worried, always worried. She knew he was different, knew the world would be hard on him. That's why she was grateful for the money he sent, but also scared, wondering what he had to endure to earn it." They ate together at Marcus's dining table, crowded but comfortable. The food was delicious, rich with flavors and traditions that connected them to Roberto's past, to his culture, to the family that had waited so long to know his fate. After dinner, as they cleaned up together, Valentina pulled Marcus aside. "There's something I want to give you," she said. "Something that should stay with the house." She pulled out a small wooden box from her bag. Inside was a simple silver locket on a chain. "This belonged to Roberto," she explained. "We found it among my mother's things after she died. Inside are tiny photos, one of Roberto, one of Howard. We think Roberto had it made before his last journey, something to carry them both together." Marcus opened the locket carefully. The photos were small but clear, Roberto looking serious but peaceful, Howard caught mid-smile. On the back was an inscription, "Siempre juntos," always together. "This should be part of the memorial in the underground room," Valentina said. A reminder that even when separated, they carried each other. Marcus's vision blurred with tears. "Thank you. I'll keep it safe. I know you will. That's why we trust you with all of this." 6 months had passed since the memorial dedication, and spring was transforming the neighborhood. Marcus stood in his front yard, watching Keisha help Mrs. Alvarez plant flowers in the beds along the fence. The driveway had been repaired properly around the access hatch, which was now marked with a small bronze plaque, "Historical Site, Sanctuary Room, 1965. Life had found its rhythm again, but everything felt different now, richer somehow, more connected. The underground room had been officially opened to visitors by appointment, managed through the Historical Society. School groups came monthly, learning about hidden histories and the courage it took to love in dangerous times. Local college students writing papers on LGBTQ+ history requested access. Families dealing with their own discovered secrets reached out, finding comfort in Roberto and Howard's story. Marcus had become something of an accidental educator, leading tours and answering questions. At first it had felt strange, but now he understood it was part of honoring the story, keeping it alive, making sure it meant something beyond just preservation. "Daddy!" Keisha called. "Mrs. Alvarez says these are the same kind of flowers that were here when Mr. Holbrook lived here." Marcus walked over. Rosa was kneeling in the dirt despite her age, her hands sure and practiced as she settled marigolds into the soil. "He always planted marigolds," she explained. "Every spring. I never knew why, but now I understand. They're traditional Mexican flowers for remembering the dead." He was remembering Roberto all those years. Marcus knelt beside them, helping press soil around the flowers. "Then we'll keep planting them, every spring in Roberto's memory." Inside, his phone buzzed with a video call. Valentina's face appeared on the screen, smiling broadly. "Marcus." "Perfect timing. I wanted to show you something." She turned the phone camera to show a small museum exhibit in Guadalajara. There, beautifully displayed, were Roberto's letters and several of his carved figurines, the ones Valentina had taken back to Mexico. "The local historical museum created this," she explained. They're telling Roberto's story here too, as part of a larger exhibit on migration and hidden histories. Miguel helped write the text. Marcus felt pride swell in his chest. That's incredible. Roberto's story being told on both sides of the border, as it should be. He belonged to both places. Valentina paused. Have you decided about this summer? The invitation still stands. We're coming, Marcus confirmed. Keisha's already counting the days. She's been learning Spanish. Miguel's been teaching her over video calls. Wonderful. Sophia is already planning everything you should see. After they hung up, Marcus stood in his living room, looking around. The house felt lived in now, truly his. Keisha's artwork covered the refrigerator. His tools organized in the garage. Photos on the walls, including now the one of Roberto and Howard, framed and honored. That evening, after Keisha was asleep, Marcus descended into the underground room. He'd started coming down here once a week or so, just to sit quietly to think. The space no longer felt sad or haunted. Instead, it felt peaceful, sanctified by the truth that now filled it. He'd arranged everything carefully. Roberto's workbench still held his tools, preserved under glass. The carved figurines were displayed on the shelves, each labeled with information about when it was made. The letters were stored in archival boxes, with copies available for researchers. The wooden music box sat on a small shelf, and next to it, in a place of honor, was Roberto's silver locket. Marcus picked up the locket, opened it to look at the two faces inside. Roberto and Howard, forever young, forever together in this small piece of silver. Your story's being told, Marcus said quietly to the photos. People know now. They understand what you meant to each other, what you sacrificed, what you built together. He set the locket back carefully. And Keisha and I, we're taking care of this place, making it a real home again, the way you both wanted it to be. A sanctuary, not from the world this time, but a sanctuary that welcomes the world in, that teaches what you learned about love and courage. Marcus climbed back up into the evening air. The neighborhood was quiet, houses lit from within, families settling in for the night. His house, Roberto and Howard's house, stood among them, no longer hiding its secrets, but sharing its truth. Inside, he checked on Keisha one more time. She slept peacefully, her bookshelf now holding a Spanish-English dictionary alongside her other books. On her wall, she'd hung a small print of Roberto's carved dove, the one that symbolized freedom. Marcus settled into his own bed, feeling the kind of tiredness that came from a full, meaningful day. Tomorrow he had work at the garage, then a tour group coming to see the room in the evening. Weekend plans included video calling with Miguel to practice Spanish. Normal life, but shot through with purpose. He thought about how much had changed since that first night when he'd heard scratching in the walls. He'd bought a house looking for shelter, for stability, for a place to raise his daughter. Instead, he'd found a story that needed telling, a family that needed closure, and a purpose he hadn't known he was seeking. The house had chosen him. He believed that now. Chosen him to be the one who'd listen to its scratching messages, who'd dig beneath the surface, who'd honor what had been hidden too long, before sleep took him. Marcus whispered into the darkness, "Thank you for trusting me with this, for letting me be part of something bigger than myself." And in the quiet of the night, the house seemed to settle around him, solid and peaceful. No more scratching sounds, no more mysterious noises. Just the gentle creaking of an old house breathing, its secrets finally told, its history finally honored. Marcus and Keisha were home. Not just in the sense of having a roof overhead, but home in the deeper meaning, connected to past and future, to family both biological and chosen, to a story that would outlive them all. The scratching in the walls had led him here, to this moment of peace and purpose. And tomorrow, the work of honoring Roberto and Howard's legacy would continue, not as a burden, but as a gift. The gift of knowing that love endures, that truth matters, that courage counts. In the underground room below, Roberto's carved figurines stood silent watch. Above ground, Marcus and Keisha slept safe and sound. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, perhaps Roberto and Howard finally rested together. Knowing their story had been told, their love acknowledged, their sanctuary preserved home, finally and forever home.